Good day, everyone, and welcome back to my very disorganized workshop. Originally, I wasn't sure. I wanted to do something with this round piece here, so I went out and thought I was going to make a rolling pin, but it wasn't really long enough. So I decided to do a little something a little closer to home. Right across the harbor from me is a lighthouse, the tallest lighthouse in Nova Scotia, actually. So I decided I'm going to turn this into the Cape Sable Island Lighthouse. It's just more of a rough going of it, and to try to get it as close as I can. It's not going to be exact, but it's going to be somewhat like it. So I'm just starting off with this piece here. I'm not going to be needing the whole thing, but I'm going to be needing a base to put that long round part into. I figure I'm going to leave that the way it is, and I'll use it for the centerpiece of the lighthouse. And the base that I'm making, I'll be able to set the centerpiece down into it. So I won't be needing this whole piece here. I'm going to turn it round and get it turning a little better, and then I'll get it ready for the chuck and turn it around for the chuck. Right now it's in the center, in between centers. I'm using a 5/8 bowl gouge to clean it up. Now this is a little rig. I don't know if I've mentioned it, but it's just two little finishing nails into a piece of dowel, and it marks how big my jaws on the chuck will go. So I know I have to go below that in order for my chuck to grab it. So I use my parting tool to make a groove for my chuck to fit into and grab it, and there we are there. So now I'm going to turn this a little bit smaller and make a base for that centerpiece. I'll throw in some little tidbits here and there. As for instance, 1861, it was only 65 foot tall, and it was made out of wood back in the day when it was first built. And now I'm just making the recess of where the centerpiece is going to be fitting into and putting a little shape onto it. This has all been made out of maple, by the way. I probably should have mentioned that earlier. I'm just using my parting tool to put a little bit of detail into the start of it. I've got to make it a little bit thicker. And back to the 5/8 bowl gouge. Now I'm satisfied with the size of it and the shape of it, so I'm just putting my parting tool down through the bottom here where I can cut it off when I'm done. And again, of course, everyone knows I don't like tool marks, so I gotta try to make sure I rub out any tool marks that's there and put the sanding paper to it. I usually go from 100 to 600, depending on how rough the piece is. When I do first start sanding, I have gone down as far as 40 grit, and then to 60, and then to the 100. So here I'm just using my coping saw to cut it off. So now I'm going to use another smaller piece of maple, and this will be a top part that sits on the lighthouse that's flared out. It's got a bit of a flare to it at the top. Smoothing it out, I'm going to be turning this around and putting it back into the chuck here quite shortly. There we are, I chopped it off, and I'm just making the size of where the centerpiece is going to have to fit into. I'm using a 3/8 spindle gouge onto it. And now back to the parting tool to get the sides nice and straight. I keep stopping and starting and stopping and starting to make sure I try to get the size just right. I don't want it too big, but I don't want it too small or too tight of a fit. So here I'm just cleaning up the bottom of it with a small detail skew. Using my 3/8 spindle gouge again. And getting that nice flare into it. Now I can make this lighthouse probably a lot closer to the real thing if it was all one piece, but doing this in 3 or 4 different pieces, I'll admit it was a little on the difficult side to get it just right. Now I'm going to sand this up to about 600 grit, and I left myself just enough room for the coping saw to snip it off. There we are. I'll sand up the top of it nice and smooth. And using a little bit of oil just to bring out the grain. You can see when you put it on that the grain just kind of pops out. Shines it up a little bit. I like this oil. It does do good on a lot of different types of wood, especially wood that's got a nice grain pattern to it. Sometimes I get maple that doesn't really have hardly any grain pattern to it at all. It's just very plain looking. Okay, so now I'm in and I'm mixing up a little bit of epoxy. This is going to be the house. Now, if you Google Cape Sable Island Lighthouse, you'll see that it's got a small red house on the very top of it. So I just cut the top off of a pop can, and I'm mixing up some epoxy and some pearlescent red to go into it. And I'll let this be for about 4 days before I'll even attempt to turn it. Stirring it up real good. I use a propane torch to get the bubbles off the top of it. A lot of the bubbles will come right to the top, and I'll just use either a heat gun or a lot of the times just a little propane torch and just pop the bubbles off the top of it, and it comes out good. Okay, so 4 days later, I'm using the Dremel. I'm just snipping the can off of it. It actually peeled off fairly decent. I thought it was going to stick to it a lot worse than that, but it didn't. It actually came off quite easily. So it's just a bit bigger than my jaws on my chuck. So what I'm doing is just marking the centers on each side and putting it in between centers. And I'll turn it this way. Just enough so I can get it in the chuck. In this lighthouse, a red light was actually first installed into it, and you can only see it for 8 miles. So in 1870, a clockwork mechanism was installed in July 15th, and it was changed to a flashing white light. And then 6 years later, a fog alarm and a steam whistle was added. But in 1900, it was decided that the lighthouse was too low and it wasn't visible far enough for the ships to see it. So in 1923 and 1924, it was made into a concrete 101-foot lighthouse from the base to the top of the house. And it was actually kerosene vapor light. And they had to carry the kerosene up from the bottom of the lighthouse to the top to keep the light working. By 1986, it was destaffed and remote monitored. And today, you can get over there by boat. Usually in the summer, we have times that you can get over there by boat and venture over to get a closer look at it. So I'm carving into this, and I'm just taking light cuts and scrapes into it. My gouge is sharp, and it feels like it just wants to sink right into the epoxy. So it's just very easy. I apologize for the camera shake. I have a holder that hangs from the ceiling, and sometimes I have it right in front of me or right beside me that I end up bumping into it while I'm carving. So now I'm going to start cleaning this up and getting it ready for sanding. And my sanding is going to be complete wet sanding the whole way. I started at 100 grit and I worked my way up to 600 grit. Now, from 600 grit, I had to go straight to 1500 grit because for some reason the local hardware store does not have sandpaper between the 600 grit and 1500 grit. So I had to order some, and I have got some coming in, that the micro mesh pads, especially designed for sanding epoxy and getting a better shine to them. But now I did sand right up to 1500. It came out actually fairly good, nice and clear, and you can even see the marble look, pearlescent marble look to it. There's another little shot of it right there. You can see into it. I used a little bit of beeswax to shine it up a little bit, and I buffed it. So now here at the end of it now, I'm getting ready to put it together, and I'm using a little bit of epoxy to put it together with. And once you get it together and this hardens, you're not going to get it apart. It's there for good. So I got the base done, and now I'm just putting a little bit on here for the top. Putting a little around the edges and on the bottom of it. And now the house, I'm putting a little on the bottom of that. Get it centered up. And that's it. Alright everybody, thank you for watching, and stay tuned because I'll be coming back shortly with another project.